All right, so the question is, can you fit 35-inch tires on your stock Ford Ranger Raptor? Well, as you can see, yes, you can. However, it's a tight fit. Let's talk about what it drives like, what clearances look like. This is my bone stock 2024 Ford Ranger Raptor. The only modification that's on it is the Ford Performance Tune. So it's making about another 50 horsepower over stock, another 100 pound-feet of torque. I'm running a set of 315/70R17 Firestone Destination MT2 tires on the factory Beadlock Capable wheels. Now, the wheels here are kind of the key to this whole picture because these are 55mm offset, which is a kind of a narrower offset. These wheels sit a little bit more inboard compared to a lot of the aftermarket wheels available, and it allows you a little bit more clearance when you're turning in this Ranger Raptor. That's why when I'm driving this around in the street, I'm not rubbing on the crash bars. I don't have a lift. I don't have any spacers here. This is factory offset as the truck rolled off the showroom floor. If you are going to a 35mm offset wheel or a 30mm or a 25mm, you're gonna probably have to remove the crash bars or install high clearance crash bars from a company like ReadyLift or something like that. So why would you want to install 35-inch tires on your Ranger Raptor? Well, the first thing is it just looks freaking cool. This setup looks amazing. The second reason is off-road performance and extra ground clearance, especially at the axle heights. So with a 35-inch tire, this is a 2-inch larger diameter than stock, which is a 33-inch tire. These 315/70R17s are 34.4 inches in diameter. So not a true 35, but pretty darn close. A little bit wider. And of course, these are mud terrains and kind of the leader in the class for a mud terrain tire. They're a little bit louder than a regular all-terrain would be. However, they have excellent mud traction and they're actually very comfortable to drive on the road. We'll give you guys some driving impressions on these tires here in a little bit. Let's walk you guys around this truck, start it up, turn the wheel, show you what clearance looks like. And I even was able to fit a 35-inch spare, same tire. It was really tight. I had to air it down just a little bit, but it fits, it works. And it actually gives me a little bit more protection too with my trailer wiring connectors. I was actually planning on relocating these. However, with a 35 in there, it might still work. It might fit in this location. We'll see. I'm gonna off-road this a little bit and see if I bash this up. And if I do, I will end up relocating it right here or maybe just tuck it underneath something. Rear clearance, no issues here. I have a set of Rock Blocks standard mud flaps on this Ranger Raptor. Immediately, the first thing I did when I installed these tires was I removed one of the bolts right here that was rubbing, and I just zip tied it. And that gave me just enough clearance so that I was clearing the back. And then what I did for the front was I removed the crash bar covers and unbolted them slightly and just pushed them just a little bit forward. Sometimes you have some play in those front crash bars. The rear's not really the case, but I found I was able to gain just another maybe 1/4 of an inch, moving it forward and then tightening it back up. Yeah. All right, so turning the wheel, let's go full lock. It's close. I can't even fit my finger through there, but it clears and it doesn't rub. So actually my biggest concern here with this setup wasn't actually clearance with the crash bars, because you can always take those out or just replace them with a set of high clearance bars. My biggest concern was the upper control arm clearance with these 55mm offset wheels. Now, as I put the camera in here, hopefully you can see how tight that is. I can get a finger through there just barely. It doesn't rub though. It's tight, but it works. I've put about maybe 200 miles on this setup so far. The tires drive pretty well on the road for being a mud terrain. I mean, these are maximum off-road traction tires. These are 21 32nds of an inch deep tread blocks. They're huge. They're really, really massive. The reason I went with these tires was a buddy of mine had a set on his Jeep and they actually did pretty well in the snow. They're not snow mountain flake rated or anything like that, but they did decent in the snow. They did decent in the rain. They were a little bit loud, but they handled well and they did amazing off-road, and they had good ride comfort too. Mud terrain tires tend to be a little bit stiffer. Their construction is a little bit more solid and robust. these seem to really iron out a lot of the bumps and imperfections in the road. All right, so you can see clearances, less than a finger gap in the front crash bar. The driver's side is a little bit tighter than the passenger side. And then in the rear here, again, about the same story. But honestly, it works. It's okay. I'm not rubbing in this on the street. Now, I did get a chance to flex this out earlier today, and it seems like the front end would be okay in a rock crawling situation. I'm not sure about full compression over a jump. Am I gonna hit the fender liner up here? I'm not sure. We're gonna find out. So I do have a very conservative 1-inch strut spacer that I am going to install on this Ranger Raptor. I'm not going to leave it like this, completely stock. I just kind of wanted to see what it looked like and see how it fit with the stock suspension. The only reason I'm going with a 1-inch spacer is just because I don't really want too much more ride height out of this. I want to be able to fit it in parking structures. I don't want to destroy the gas mileage. And I still like a little bit of rake to the truck because I do put a lot of stuff in the bed. I do haul a lot of tires and wheels and heavy stuff in the back of this. And it will be used for towing, so I don't want to have that, Carolina squat to this thing. I don't really need it to be completely leveled out. For most people, if you're going to want to put 35s, you're probably going to want to put a 2-inch level on the front, like a 2-inch, 2.5-inch, and a 1-inch in the rear would be ideal. You don't want to go too high with that front level just because you lose the ability to retain your alignment with the upper control arm, with the factory upper control arm. So you kind of have to be a little bit careful. 2-inch, 1.5-inch, that's kind of probably the sweet spot for most people's needs. And also here in Michigan, I don't really need all that extra ground clearance. So right now, already gaining some ground clearance with the tires. Do I need more than 13 inches of ground clearance in my Ranger Raptor? Not really. This isn't quite a rock crawler. It's a high-speed desert runner. And we're gonna test this out in the dunes here in a little bit this summer. So first we'll probably take it to an off-road park, test it in the mud a little bit, see how it does this spring. But yeah, I'm really excited to see how this performs off-road. I think honestly it does great stock, but there's just a little bit more of a performance envelope you can get out of this truck, and I would like it to be slightly more capable in crawling situations, whereas before it just didn't quite have the ground clearance for it. All right, we've walked around this, you've seen it. I think it looks absolutely phenomenal. The stance is just about perfect on these stock wheels. The tires stick out quite a bit more, so they pretty much are flush with this fender right here. You can just see that. Just about perfect. They're not sticking out, and I like that because at high speed, you're not kicking up rocks onto the side of your body. These mud flaps actually cover where the front tire is. And granted, these are mud trains, so they're not going to be picking up tiny stones as often, but when they do pick up stones, they're going to be big, and you don't want those hitting the side of your truck. So it's good to have some protection on there. That's why I've left the running boards on. My only reservation with this wheel and tire setup, however, was weight. These weigh a lot. The wheels themselves are about 37, 38 pounds a piece, not light. The non-beadlock wheels are about 28 pounds a piece, so about 10 pounds heavier than the non-beadlocks. And these tires weigh 67 pounds each. So I think that puts the total weight at about 105 pounds per corner, which is a lot. You can get a much lighter 35-inch wheel and tire package. However, on a 5,300 pound truck, I thought I would notice the difference more. I don't. This rides better than the factory setup. It's a little bit softer than the KO3. It's not as busy over smaller bumps. Let's go drive it. We'll show you how it performs on the road. So the weight actually wasn't as much of an issue as I thought it would be. All right, in reverse, full lock, forward, full lock the other way. Feeling pretty good. Steering weight feels about the same as it used to. No changes there. Let's listen to the noise. Because so far, that's really the biggest difference that I'm noticing with these MT2s compared to a standard all-terrain tire. I do have some time with the Firestone Destination XT, which is Firestone's all-terrain. It kind of splits the difference between this and something like the Bridgestone Ascent, which is a super street-friendly all-terrain tire. Awesome snow performance, really good wet performance, excellent dry traction, and completely quiet. So if there's kind of a sliding scale in terms of street performance to off-road performance to aggressiveness, noise, this would kind of be the extreme at the other end of the spectrum. I've been daily driving this truck on the Bridgestone Dueler Ascents, and it's been great. The only thing that I felt was lacking with those tires was mud performance and off-road traction. Mostly just in the mud, to be honest. On the dirt, they performed well. In the snow and ice, they performed amazingly well. But I would like a tire that I can take off-road and that, you know, it really can get me through some sticky situations. We have some pretty nasty clay in some of the off-road parks here in Michigan, and a lot of the trails are just straight up mud here. So I wanted something that I can get me through situations without really having to worry too much about having traction problems. Great big turkey there. Wow. The big surprise with these tires is just how sharp their initial turn-in response is. They actually feel really good. And I think we're good to go. All right, let's just go straight onto the highway here. With the tune, not really noticing a difference in power. With a larger diameter, this truck is fast enough with 455 horsepower. Plenty of grunt merging onto the highway, no complaints. The smoother the pavement, the louder these tires get. So this is kind of about cruising volume here. The pitch changes as your speed increases. I was able to go in with the Ford Performance tuner, change the tire diameter. I went from, I think it was like 638 or 636 revolutions per minute to down to 605 revolutions per minute. Honestly, it's louder, but it's bearable. You can turn on some music and pretty much drown everything out. Most of the driving that I do with this truck is around town at lower speeds in the city. So you don't really hear these tires too much until you start to crest 40, 55 miles an hour or so. And after that, they do get a little bit louder. There's the exhaust and quiet. You definitely have to speak up a little bit more if you're having a conversation in the truck with these tires. That's really the only downside, and it's something you would expect with a mud terrain. I mentioned this earlier, but the biggest surprise here was that these are actually the softest riding tires that I've had on this truck so far. So I've tested KO3s, KO2s, instead of used KO2s, the Bridgestone Dueler AT Ascent, and these MT2s just filter out all the small road imperfections, all the bumps. They ride amazing. Part of that could be just because this is a larger diameter tire, and it doesn't need as much effort to roll over those imperfections, but also it feels like the construction of the tire between the tread and just the overall design of it is really beneficial to ride quality. It really soaks up a lot of those impacts, which is nice. All right, so we've got sport mode in our suspension, comfort steering, Baja exhaust. Let's see how this handles. about like an all-terrain in the dry. Wet traction feels similar to the KO3, maybe a little bit less now that the KO3 has broken in. I haven't spent a ton of time on these tires in the wet, so I'll give you guys some more driving impressions then. But again, the focus here is off-road traction and maximum mud performance. So we need to kind of keep in mind what the goals are here with this setup. Ultimately, if you're not doing a lot of off-roading, if you're mostly driving on the street, I would recommend a 35-inch all-terrain. Something like the Dueler AT Ascent, the Destination XT, the BFG KO3, the AT4W from Falcon. If you want to go for a slightly more conservative size on your stock Ranger Raptor, and you don't want to have to worry about a lift or rubbing or finagling with the crash bars, stuff like that, and you just want a plug-and-play setup, you don't have to worry about anything, honestly, 34-inch tires are probably the way to go. You can get a set of 295 70 R17s with the MT2, and honestly, that probably would have been the ideal setup for this truck without worrying about rubbing or anything. But I did want the extra clearance, and I wanted to see how 35s fit. So we're going for it. I feel like if I got 34s, I'd always have wondered what 35s would have been like, and I would have kind of regretted eventually. So we're just going full ham, and then we're going to adjust accordingly. If it rubs off-road, if it rubs at full compression, we will make changes and go from there. Again, the Ranger Raptor is a truck that's doing its best impression of a sports car. If you've owned sports cars in the past, that's kind of your MO, that's kind of what you prefer, the driving dynamics, everything. The Ranger Raptor will feel right at home. It'll just be a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, a little bit taller, but it kind of has a little bit of that flickable DNA. And a lower traction tire, like the KO3, like a standard all-terrain, like this mud-terrain tire, it kind of lends itself to the charm of that chassis control and those dynamics. Again, these are very first impressions that I'm going to be giving you guys today. First couple hundred miles on these tires. We're going to go take them off-road, see how they perform through some water, some mud. We'll put it at 4 high and see if we have any rubbing, flex it out a little bit. Again, we're not going to be doing any high-speed running in today's video. That'll be for later on in the future. But I think initial impressions, if you run the factory wheels, you could fit 35-inch tires on your Ranger Raptor with minimal rubbing, minimal modification. And I think that's kind of cool. It even fits in the spare tire well, which was kind of a surprise. It's a very tight fit. I did have to air down maybe like 10 PSI, so maybe that tire back there is at 25 PSI or so. I haven't checked, but if I am ever off-roading this truck, I always have an air compressor with me, so that's not really a concern to air back up. And if I get a flat on the road, then there's always a gas station nearby, so not a huge deal. Driving over bumps on these tires, little bits of gravel, rough pavement, you don't even feel it. It's pretty crazy. Compressions here. No rubbing. Don't hear anything weird. So far, so good. A little bit bumpy through here. I think we're going to be good off-road with these. Traction is just absolutely phenomenal. Turning here a little bit. Going over some bumps. No rubbing, that's good. can't wait to do a proper off-road test with these. And we're sitting at 38 PSI at all 4 corners. So not aired down at all, completely at placard pressures. And ride comfort is just phenomenal. You can really feel a difference with the extra ground clearance. You feel a little bit extra height in the cab here. More sidewall is always a good thing. One of my biggest complaints with these wheels, with the standard KO3 tires, was that the beadlock rings stuck so far out from everything else that it just looked weird. And this tire is so much wider that I feel like it fits the 8.5-inch rim much better aesthetically, and it seems like it just works from a visual perspective. I'll still probably end up scratching up those beadlock rings at some point on a trail, off-roading, but you can always just polish them out and repowder coat them or something, or just leave them. I did do a lot of searching online, and one of the reasons why I went with this setup is because I couldn't really find a ton of answers as to whether this worked. Some people said upper control arm clearance is a little bit too close for comfort. Other people said, yeah, I fit 35 by 12.5-inch tires on, no problem, everything worked. So your experience could be different depending on the tire size you're running, but it seems like the general consensus is that 35s fit on factory wheels. Bumpy section of road back there, smoothed it all out, just awesome. Very little NVH over bumps too. Aside from the tread growl, this is a very quiet tire. It doesn't transmit any boominess or sounds into the cabin as you're going over bumps. Pretty rough section back there. Again, nothing. I regularly average about 14, 15 miles to the gallon in this, but I'll be honest, I'm mostly doing short trips in this. I take my kid to school, I go grocery shopping. You know, I'm not driving long distances. Today though, driving this thing around, I was able to average around 18 miles to the gallon. So that's usually about what I'm driving, what I'm averaging if I'm driving more throughout the day and keeping the engine warm, keeping the fluids warm. Initially I'm not really seeing that much of an MPG hit, maybe 1 mile per gallon on the highway. I think it was averaging about 18 on the highway as opposed to 19, which is pretty regular. I'll get some more driving impressions once I get some more miles on these tires and the setup. It's reasonable to expect a small fuel economy hit with the increased ride height, the larger tire, the more aggressive tread. So who knows? Ultimately, I didn't buy this truck to get good gas mileage. I'm getting pretty bad gas mileage already, so I figured if I can gain some off-road capability and make this thing look even cooler, then why not? Just go for it. To be honest, I'm not really the best person to ask on fuel economy with this truck, just because my driving habits don't lend themselves well to getting good gas mileage at all. When I take this on a road trip someday, I'll let you guys know. How about that? All right, so before we dip onto our little bumpy road, off-road section of course here, let's sum up street driving impressions. Excellent ride quality. Noise is about what you would expect from a mud terrain. I think it's bearable. We'll see how I feel after maybe spending some more hours behind the wheel. I guess we'll just leave this in 4 auto through here. That's probably fine. We don't really have any major mud holes, but let's see here. We do have this section which gets pretty gooey. This is a little bit yucky. Not that we're gonna get stuck, but I mean, it's not even slipping through there, and that was pretty nasty. Big treads eject all that mud very quickly. That's what you want. A little bit more mud. Some washboarding here. Again, soaks it all up just beautifully. Let's go into 4 high and let's flex this out just a little bit. Let's just see what we're looking like here. All right. Okay, so rear suspension, that's pretty much max articulation. Front, that looks about like it is at the limit of its travel. And we've got a pretty good, all right, so we're rubbing at the rear crash bar. Front has good clearance. Getting a little bit of rub at that rear crash bar. So we might have to pull that out and replace it with a high clearance bar. Oh, traction is just awesome. That is amazing. Some nice deep water through here. Wash off those tires a bit. The base of this road is all gravel, so you're not really going to get stuck in anything unless if it's deep. I'm always just blown away at how the Ranger Raptor soaks up bumps. This suspension is absolutely incredible. A couple of ducks right here, so we're not going to mess up their home. Carry on, ducks. And again, we are in, let's see, our suspension is in off-road mode. What about normal? See what we're looking like here. I don't know if I can even see much with the light we have. Yeah, there was still a little bit of rub on that rear crash bar. Fronts look pretty clear. I don't know, guys, you might be okay with the factory crash bars here in the setup. Wanted to go higher clearance, you could, but I know those rears are kind of a pain to get out. But if you're going to be wheeling your car, if you're going to be off-roading it pretty regularly, that's probably something you're going to want to do. I'm curious to see, I'm sure we'll get more clearance once I have the front lift on this. But maybe then I won't need to do anything with the crash bar. Maybe then the factory crash bars will fit. That was fun. A good little taste of what the Ranger Raptor is capable of here. We'll do a proper off-road test with it, but until then, man, I'm actually surprised that this doesn't rub more in stock configuration off-road, fully flexed out. I don't know what it's like at full compression, high speed. We'll have to find out at some point. Okay guys, that's a wrap. Initial impressions driving the Ranger Raptor on mud terrains on 35s. It works better than I expected it to, and it's really all down to that higher offset. So the more inboard your wheels are, the easier it is to clear at those turning extremes. If your wheels are farther out, that pivot point is going to be moved forward and backward, and you're going to need more clearance in the wheel wells with the crash bars, with the mud flaps, with the fenders. So if you like that look where the truck is sitting with a really wide stance and you've got maybe a little bit of poke coming out of the fender, if it's legal where you drive, you're going to have to do a little bit more modification. But if you're happy with just running the factory wheels and on a set of 35s, I think you can have minimal clearance issues. And honestly, you might even be able to just off-road this just fine on 35-inch tires with the factory suspension. If you want to play it safe, go with a set of 34s, or throw a little bit of a front-end lift on there. Go with the spacer lift. Try to avoid doing a collar lift on these Fox shocks. The spacer lift is the best way to go if you do want to do a lift. It doesn't affect the stiffness or really the shock tuning of the Fox live valves. Hopefully someday Fox will come out with a plug-and-play solution as a lift for the Ranger Raptor. But until then, I think a spacer lift is probably the best way to go, from my research at least. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed this first impressions video. We'll come back with a proper off-road test here soon. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next one.